Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello and welcome to Getting to Know You. I'm your host, Robert Jaquay. On today's program, we're going to be talking about New York State heritage areas. And we're going to be speaking with Marcia Kees, who is a coordinator for the New York State Heritage Programs. And we're going to be speaking with Tom Carroll, who is the executive director for the Hudson Mohawk Industrial Gateway and for Riverspark Heritage Area. Let's go meet them. Marcia and Tom, I want to thank you very much for agreeing to be guests on the show today. Nice having you here.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Before we start talking about the New York State heritage areas, I'd like to have our viewers get a little bit of information about you, where you came from, how you got to this point in time. So Marcia, I'm going to start with you.
All right. Well, thank you for inviting us. We appreciate being here. I'm from the Mohawk Valley originally, grew up in Fulton County, and went away to school, went away to work, and decided this was a good place to live and came back. And have been here now 25 years or so, living in the Saratoga County area. I work for New York State Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, and my office is at Peebles Island State Park, which is in Waterford and in Cohoes. It's a wonderful place to work. And at that job, I'm the coordinator of the New York State Heritage Area Program, and that's the subject of our conversation today. So my background is in history. I'm a proud graduate of SUNY Oswego.
Okay.
And many snowstorms there. And I have gone back many a time. And also I have a master's in planning from Cornell University. So I've been with state parks about 25 years.
Okay.
And have worked 20 years with the State Heritage Area Program, working with other folks in the agency and around the state of New York, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
Excellent. How about you, Tom?
I like to describe myself first and foremost as a fourth-generation townie from Princeton, New Jersey. Great-grandfather who came over with a shirt on his back just before the 1860 census. I happened by accident to have been born on Albert Einstein's 70th birthday, and my mother thought that was very important. So she encouraged me to act like Einstein when I was a kid. And since I was good in math and it was the Cold War, everybody thought I should become a rocket scientist and beat the Russians. So I did end up going to Caltech as an undergraduate. And there, instead of becoming a rocket scientist, I was seduced by the historians who convinced me that doing history was far more fun than designing airplanes. And so I changed my major and I became a historian and combined my interest by becoming a historian of science and technology. After getting my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania, I came up here to be a professor at RPI, where I taught history, particularly history of American science and technology, for almost 17 years. But in January of 1997, I left my tenured professorship at RPI, some would say precipitously, to become the director of the Hudson Mohawk Industrial Gateway, an organization founded in 1972 in this area to promote the industrial heritage of this region, and one of the important organizations in creating the heritage area system we're going to talk about today. And I've been running that since 1997, and since December of 2002, the Gateway has also been what's called the management entity for the Riverspark Heritage Area, which was the first of the now 20 heritage areas in New York State, which Marcia will tell you all about.
Right. Well, we're going to go right to our next question, and we talk about what can you define the heritage areas of New York State? I mean, what is it, and where are they?
Okay. Well, the New York State Heritage Area Program is, as Tom just said, there are 20 state-designated heritage areas, but within those 20 heritage areas are over 400 communities throughout 27 of our counties in New York State. So there are places that were designated in law by the state legislature as really special places of significance. So we define a heritage area as it's an initiative, it's a program that really helps connect people to their place, where they live, and to their history. and most importantly, connecting the people within those places. So it's both a place on the land, a place where you live, but it's also a process. It's a program which we have several goals, which we'll get into, that help people make their communities a better place to live. So the goals of the program are really fourfold. I mean, the first is really to preserve the natural resources and the cultural and historic resources that are there. The churches, the main streets, the huge historic districts, the rivers, the lakes, all of those resources, because then you use those resources to help interpret the stories that are behind those places. And in doing so, hopefully people learn about where they live and gain some pride in where they're living. And also it's important to use the resources for good recreational purposes, and I like to jokingly refer to recreation as not only taking the kayak out on the river, but also window shopping on Main Street. So it's recreation, and if you do those things, you preserve the resources and interpret them and use them for good purposes, the economic revitalization of the communities is really an ultimate goal of the program.
How do you determine what is a place? Is it an event in history? Is it an object like a building or?
It's all of that
Okay.
and more. I mean, back when the program started 25 years ago, and this year we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the program and the 30th anniversary of Riverspark, where Tom works. That's when the legislation was set up. So at that time, back then, in the late 70s and very early 80s, 1980, 81, the state legislature asked the agency I work for, New York State Parks and Recreation and Historic Preservation, to do a study, to look at the state as a whole and determine where these places are based on some criteria and based on a set of themes. And those themes are really those stories that I mentioned, themes such as where the transportation networks created settlement patterns in the state, where the immigration and migration patterns were the most prominent, where some of the cultural aspects of the state really flowered the most, such as in Buffalo, the flowering of culture. Now, you don't normally think of Buffalo as being a place where culture may have flourished, but it did, particularly with the Erie Canal and the transportation hub around Buffalo. So those themes, together with a very extensive survey of the areas around the state, really began to isolate places that you could begin to use the resources to tell those stories. Everyone has a history, and we aren't here to say that your history is less important than someone else's. That's not the purpose of the program at all. It's really to embellish the history that is there and help people understand it. But there often has to be a critical mass for people to begin to get it. The main streets in some communities look like they did 150 years ago. And in other places, they've perhaps been all torn down through urban renewal in the 1960s or through more recent development. So in some places, it's easier to tell the story than in others because there's more there. And that's where those places were selected after quite a bit of study.
So historic preservation is a part of this as well, right?
Definitely.
So does that come? They work hand in hand. Does that come first, or do you designate the area and all of a sudden you look around and say, no, we can't let this building go. We have to let this thing stay? Or
well, many of the heritage areas have been designated now since the early 1980s. Some have just been designated more recently, and so we try to work with these communities, and we have help educate the local folks to what they have so that they preserve their own communities. We are not the state of New York coming in and telling you, Tom Carroll, what you can and cannot do in your community. We provide assistance and some guidance to help them, but it's not a regulatory program. So preservation is definitely an integral part.
Okay, we're going to bounce back and forth a little bit because Tom, Riverspark really is significant in this whole history of this project, I'll call it. Right?
Correct. Riverspark was created in 1977. It's its 30th anniversary. And it was an outgrowth of a number of things. Originally, the Heritage Area Program used a designation of urban cultural parks rather than heritage areas. The name has evolved over time. And the initial notion was that people should visit parks not only to commune with bears and take picnics and hike in the woods and to be connected to nature, but also to go to urban areas and to connect with culture. The idea grew out of a number of people right in this area concerned about urban renewal. You have to put yourself back in the mind of the 60s when we were in the space race. The northeastern cities in the United States were decaying, whereas Los Angeles was booming with the aerospace industries, and the freeways were great, and everybody was talking about surfing and listening to the Beach Boys. And it seemed that by this time the whole world would be vacationing on Mars and wearing the clothes that Flash Gordon wore and living like the Jetsons. And the only way you could help these struggling cities in the Northeast was to bulldoze them and let them spring up all over again like Los Angeles. It didn't quite work out that way, and there were some eccentric people back then who knew that it wouldn't work out that way, and that in fact the heritage of this area and the terrific architectural infrastructure in places like downtown Troy, the terrific industrial heritage of places like the Harmony Mills and Cohoes were bankable assets, and that eventually the world would come round to that and appreciate it. And that's how it got started. Paul Bray, who's pretty well known in this area for organizing the Albany Roundtable and running a column in the Albany Times-Union and doing a million other things, back then was an attorney who drafted legislation for the legislature, various people, and he was pretty active at that time in trying to come up with ideas for the region. The legend is that he whispered the idea of Riverspark in the ear of Ron Canestrari, now the Assembly Majority Leader, but then the mayor of Cohoes, a very young mayor of Cohoes. And from that, a whole project got spawned. Tom McGuire, who used to have my position as executive director of the Hudson Mohawk Industrial Gateway, sat down with Paul Bray and they wrote up a proposal, and one thing led to another. Next thing you know, the legislature created it, and originally 6 municipalities joined together. Later the town of Colonie was added. Right. So there are now 7 municipalities in the organization. First of all, you have to understand the name Riverspark, which is a cutesy name. I don't know who came up with it, to tell you the honest truth. It may have been some consultants from
20 years.
It may have been some consultants from Massachusetts who helped design the Troy Visitor Center. It was originally called the Hudson Mohawk Urban Cultural Park Commission. There you go. A mouthful. The cutesy name Riverspark came about because the basic argument is that water ignited the Industrial Revolution in this area. There are 2 kinds of water here. Horizontal water are good for navigation, transportation, and commerce, like, of course, the Hudson River, supplemented by the deliberately designed Erie Canal and the Champlain Canal created here in the mid-1820s, making this essentially the O'Hare Airport of the 1830s, a bustling commercial area, complemented by the other kind of water, which is the falling water caused by the water from the plateaus on either side of the Hudson and Mohawk rivers draining into those rivers. Most notably, of course, the famous Cohoes Falls. In Cohoes, they are 70 or 75 feet high and about a quarter-mile wide, and the second most powerful waterfalls in North America east of the Mississippi River, second only to Niagara.
Seriously.
There are 2 smaller waterfalls, but very important ones in Troy, on the Post and Kill and the Winenskill. And they provided the kind of falling water you needed to turn water wheels to run mills, to do manufacturing. So you had commerce on the horizontal water and industry on the falling water, and they were a 5-minute walk apart, which is very rare, and made this area particularly attractive from about 1790, 1800 to the Civil War as one of the earliest places to develop as an urban industrial manufacturing and commercial center at a time when 95% of the population lived on farms or in villages of 200 or 250 people. So this was a prototype modern urban industrial city area. We like to call it the Silicon Valley of the 19th century.
Yes, yes.
Right.
And we already knew that canal busts from all over the world were coming here to look at the Erie Canal, and that people interested in the history of iron and steel or in the Civil War were interested in all of the developments in that realm that occurred here. Very significant ones, everything from first machine-made railroad spikes and horseshoes to the rolling of the deck plates for the USS Monitor to the first commercial melt of stainless steel by Mayor Corning's father, the production of the stainless steel spire for the Chrysler Building in Manhattan, in Watervliet, and so on. We already knew that people, Civil War buffs came here for that Monitor and to see some of the famous grave sites here, et cetera, and we thought that that could be further developed as well as, of course, attracting people here for the architecture, which is stunning and has attracted a number of Hollywood producers and directors, most notably Martin Scorsese, who filmed about 80% of The Age of Innocence in downtown Troy.
Right.
So that was why the organization was formed. It's to put the past to good use, to try to use that heritage to produce a thoroughgoing and sustainable prosperity in the area again. I'm happy to say after 30 years of struggling, it's starting to bear some fruit.
Yeah, you guys are going to ask you. Good.
It takes a lot of time and a lot of patience for this sort of thing to take root. And for people who looked at Troy and Cohoes 30 or 40 years ago and set up a program like this, it was really quite visionary. And I think we have to thank folks like Paul Bray and Tom Phelan and Assemblyman Maurice Hinchey, now Congressman Hinchey, who we just presented an award to him last week at a forum that we had in Troy for his sponsorship of the legislation. There were several others too, of course. Senator Bruno was sponsor in the Senate. It was really quite visionary for them to set up this program, and there was quite a bit of study work, and a lot of people thought, why were they spending 4 or 5 years studying this concept before the program was actually implemented? Because Riverspark was set up in 1977, but there was also a study bill to look at this statewide, and it was 4 years later that the legislation then established the program, hence the 30th anniversary of one of our prototypes heritage areas and the 25th of the statewide program, because it took them 4 years or so to look at this concept to be sure it was sound. And it had started to take root a little bit in other places around the country as well, in places like Lowell, Massachusetts. Again, a reaction to some of those urban renewal demolitions that were taking around the country. But New York was really the first state to implement this at a statewide level in a statewide program. There were heritage areas designated at a national level, with Lowell being the first, then called Urban Cultural Park in the late 70s. And then there was a national heritage area designated in 1984, the Illinois and Michigan Canal. And then there were a few since then. There are now 37 national heritage areas that are designated at the congressional level by Congress. So it's really a concept that now throughout the 80s and the 90s has really caught on, and it's become much more prevalent around the country as well as in our own state.
Now the idea here is you have the state basically as an overstructure, but you're depending on the community itself.
It's a
or
partnership.
Communities itself. It's a partnership. You're
Yes.
having people work together and to try to achieve this particular end result.
These goals that I mentioned earlier, trying to build communities and revitalize communities and build their own capacity within their community or their region. Some of these started very early as just one community. The city of Buffalo, the city of Albany, the city of Rochester. The Riverspark model was 6 communities, now 7, that was interjurisdictional. So they were both one community and there were also several communities. Now later in the 80s, we have the Mohawk Valley Heritage Corridor, which is 8 counties, from Albany County to Oneida County, with over 200 municipalities within those counties that are part of one heritage area. But it's the same concept applied at a larger regional scale. But the same stories need to be told, and much of the interpretive components are really a key tourism element, which is a part also of this program.
So you promote this as a whole program.
Mm-hmm.
You have a very attractive brochure, actually.
Thank you.
And this is in visitor centers? Is this something that you pick up if you stop at the information center on the thruway or whatever?
Yes, so I'm glad you asked.
Yes.
That's part of what the state system tries to do, is to not only provide the framework and some guidelines to communities to do what it is they would like to do. We try to do some marketing as best we can with the resources that we have for brochures, such as the Heritage Area brochure, and we do put them out on the thruway and give them to anyone who would like to distribute them. In the 1980s, there was funding to construct a network of visitor centers.
Okay.
There are 3 in the Riverspark area, 1 in Troy, 1 in Kees, and then also there's 1 in Waterford, which was co-funded by funding from the Canal Corporation. And then there are visitor centers in all of the heritage areas that are meant to be places where you as a visitor go to learn about what else there is to see and do in the area. So they are not museums per se, but they are places where we hope people will go to visit first when you come into a community, and then learn what else there is to do and go out and spend those wonderful tourism dollars that then generate and multiply throughout our communities.
So do chambers promote this as well, or other organizations to promote this?
Each area has its own sort of management entity. In Albany, one example is where the Albany Visitor Center, which is located in Quackenbush Square, right across the street from the Palace Theater. They are operated, that complex is operated by the Albany County Convention and Visitor Bureau under a contract with the City of Albany. So the City of Albany pays the Albany County Convention and Visitor Bureau to operate that visitor center, and they of course are a county-wide Convention and Visitor Bureau, so they have other responsibilities as well, but that's their home, that's their headquarters, and that's where they do a lot of their work out of. And in other communities, the management entities are different. In many cases, there is a shared arrangement in Syracuse. The city has a partnership with the Erie Canal Museum, which is a private nonprofit organization where the visitor center and the museum are operated jointly by the nonprofit organization under a contract with the city. And Tom can explain how the ones here are operated as well. They're all a little bit different.
Yes.
Right. The visitor centers are integral to understanding the relationship between the state and the local organizations or local entities in terms of sort of who sponsors and funds this. In most cases, what happened is similar to what happened in the Riverspark Heritage Area, which was the state provided a substantial amount of the funding to get the first visitor centers up and running. The Troy Visitor Center came first, and the state provided the bulk of the funding for that. But then the municipality where the visitor center is located is on the hook for 23 years to keep it running at its expense. In addition to that, all of the 7 municipalities in the 3 counties in Riverspark are expected to contribute what's called the local share of financing every year to help pay the cost of all of this. I think the second thing to say about the visitor centers is a very important one, which is, I don't know whether we can make this claim, but if we can't, we're really close to being able to make this claim, that the visitor centers of the heritage areas across the state are the primary delivery vehicle on the ground for visitor services in the state of New York. I don't think there's any other network of visitor centers that's as large or serves as large a clientele as we do. And that makes us a really important component to this, especially in the kinds of areas that we're in, where people need a little hand-holding to figure out what to see and why it's important. And I think that's another thing to say that's important about understanding the visitor center concept in the heritage areas. People say, well, why in the world do you have a visitor center in Troy way back in 1987 when nobody came to Troy to visit? It wasn't true, but people thought nobody came to Troy to visit. Certainly fewer came then than are coming now, and probably fewer are coming now than are going to be coming in the next 10 years. Troy is taking off like a rocket at the moment. And it's critical to understand that if you're using heritage tourism as a component of reinvigorating the economy of local areas like Troy, it's very important to have the visitor center there early on, even if you don't have a lot of visitors, so that the visitors who do come can understand what they're seeing, have a good experience, and go away as ambassadors for that area. It's worth the investment to get that early on because they send people back. We know that for a fact because people come back to our visitor center and say, my friend from Pasadena told me I should come here on my trip through the East because Troy has fabulous wrought iron staircases and Tiffany windows and so on and so forth.
And friendly people.
And friendly people like us. And a good visitor center that will hold their kids.
I would imagine that the schools or education has a part to play in this as also. I mean, you have an audience, do you not, inviting classrooms or students to come to the visitor center as well to learn more about the area and what?
Several of the visitor centers do cater to school groups. I know Albany, for example, has I think about 30,000 people through the past year, and probably 15 of those are school children. It takes a while to get the programs developed with the schools and to get the resources and the field trips lined up, but all of them have certainly worked in that regard, some more than others.
Right. We all do school groups programs. Varies depending upon how much funding we've got to make it happen and how much funding the school districts have to come visit you. But to give you an example, the entire Tech Valley High School, all the students and all of the teachers came through both the Troy Visitor Center and our museum at the Hudson Mohawk Industrial Gateway, the Bird and Iron Works Museum in South Troy, in September as one of the first things they did when they set the school up. We had a whole class of students at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute at the other end of the spectrum come up to the Waterford Visitor Center for an afternoon orientation, lecture by me, walking tour of the canal sites there, etc. Also at the beginning of the school year for a particular course they had on science, technology, and community in the local area. We also, every year, I'm proud to say, get a visit from the 4th grade of School 12 in South Troy, a particularly energetic teacher there who's very good at making sure that the kids in South Troy know they come from one of the most famous industrial areas in the country, which is true. And they are extremely knowledgeable. And I'm also very proud to say that I've pretty regularly, although I haven't done it in the last couple of years, gone over to the kindergarten class at the Maplewood School every year. The Maplewood School just happens to be built right on the route of the enlarged Erie Canal from the 1850s. And so we go every year to the class and teach them that the Erie Canal was 4 feet deep and 40 feet wide, and that 4 feet deep would have meant that their heads would be about a half an inch out of the water. That sticks in their heads there. They remember that for the rest of their lives. So we try to do everything from kindergarten through postgraduate work.
I would imagine that there are people who, I mean, you're people who live in New York City who haven't been to the Statue of Liberty. I imagine there's a lot of people in this area who have not been to this.
Yeah, we find that's very true. I mean, it's sort of the grass is always greener syndrome where, you know, you have the phenomenal history right in your own backyard, but you're going to go 1,000 miles away to visit something else. So we're trying to educate people in the local area that what they have is as important as what is 1,000 miles away, as well as trying to get those people who are 1,000 miles away to come to visit here. So it is really a two-pronged program, and we do a lot with tourism, particularly heritage tourism, but really the program was grounded in providing benefits to the communities where they are. And if you make a community a good place to live, it'll also be a good place to visit. And with places like Troy and Cohoes and Watervliet, the architecture that's there and the history that's there, all it really takes is a matter of packaging it, putting it together in a way that will be of interest to people, and with the fun facts that Tom has, and you know, cloning him around all the heritage areas, which we've tried to do, but it hasn't worked yet. Got to get that tech knowledge going on that, Tom. But we have many people out and about the state in the heritage programs who are very talented and very resourceful. And so from the state perspective, the partnership aspect of this is just so critical. We provide the framework, we provide some grant funding, which is mostly competitive grant funding through Environmental Protection Fund, for example. But it's really the folks at the local level and in the regional heritage areas that make it happen. They're out there on the ground doing it. So it's really
people are really
important.
committed to this kind of thing, aren't they? They're really, really enthusiastic about history and preservation and all that. And
well, I'll start out with an anecdote about what a challenge it is to do this, but I'll end up on a positive note. Probably the best example I can give you about the challenge of making sure everybody knows about this is that we had a gentleman show up at our front door at the Bird and Iron Works Museum in South Troy one afternoon. And I told them, among other things, about the history of bell making in this area. There are 4 bell foundries in this area. Between them, they made about 100,000 bells, including just about every important bell in North America, except for, of course, the Liberty Bell, which cracked. But they did make the the replacement for the Liberty Bell, which today hangs in Independence Hall. That was made at 22 River Street in downtown Troy. This man lived about 4 blocks from where that bell was made. And not only did he not know it, but when I told him that the bell hanging in Independence Hall was a bell from 22 River Street in Troy, he didn't believe me. He said that couldn't possibly happen in Troy. So we do have an uphill struggle, so I'm trying to convince people of this. But we are having some success. In fact, too much. I can't even return all the phone calls anymore. We're really swamped. And certain strategies that you use are very good roundabout and indirect ways to introduce people to this. Right here in the town of Colonie, you have this marvelous Schuyler Flats Park.
Yes.
Right on 32, right by the river. That's an extremely important historical area. Not only do you have the remains of the Schuyler family settlement there and that whole history that comes from that, but you've also got the route of the Erie Canal right through that park. People go there to walk their dogs, to jog, to meditate in the morning, to ride bicycles, to play soccer or whatever, and they pick up the heritage sort of by osmosis while they're doing that. That's an important thing. It provides both recreation and historic education without beating people over the heads about it. It's a really successful park. You go there any Saturday if the weather's even halfway decent. The place is packed with people.
Who knew, really? It's wonderful.
And that's a Riverspark project.
It is a
Yes,
Riverspark project.
and it's got grant funding in it from all sorts of various parties at every level of government.
Now, you've mentioned the Cohoes Falls and its importance, but you also, you provided us with some photographs, some other places around here. Harmony Mills you've talked about. Talk a little about Harmony Mills.
Well, Harmony Mills is a whole complex of buildings. It's one of the most intact complexes of textile manufacturing left in the United States from the 19th century. It was started in the early 1800s. It actually was a little slower in starting than Troy, simply because the Cohoes Falls was so big and so powerful that they really had to work for a while to figure out how to harness it and put it to use. But it finally got going in about the third decade of the 19th century, and by the 1860s it was booming. Harmony Mill Building Number 3, the largest building, still standing, was, when it was finished, the largest cotton textile mill building in the United States. It has in its basement the largest cast iron water turbines ever made, famous Boyden turbines. And unfortunately, like most textile mills in the Northeast, it fell on hard times and largely shut down in the Great Depression and was reasonably underutilized, to put it mildly, until very recently when a couple of developers came up from Brooklyn and bought it, and they've worked very hard with the community there. And now the lower half of the Harmony Mills Building Number 3 has been converted to loft apartments. There are 96 of them. They rented in 3 months from the time they made them available, and they're very popular. And they're a good example of sort of the end game of the long-term strategy here. The long-term strategy is to start by getting people interested in the heritage, work towards bringing people to destinations like pubs and restaurants and antiques districts and farmers markets, which I'm proud to say we brought to the Troy waterfront. Then getting office buildings made out of old factories so that people come to work there, and eventually getting people to come live in the urban context. That's really sort of down the road, but it's now happening in spades in this area. Not only are Harmony Mills being converted, but there are townhouses and condominiums being built on the waterfronts, and an old collar and cuff factory up in oilcloth collar cuff factory up in Lansingburg has been converted to condominiums. An old department store building in downtown Troy is currently being converted to loft apartments. It's happening all over, and that residential boom in the area is really an end point. When you get that, and you get that happening energetically, you know that you're on the road towards reviving these communities, which was the intention 30 years ago. Right. And is now starting to bear fruit.
What an experiment. Who knew, really, and how
we
wonderful.
did.
Yeah, you did. That's the visionaries.
And it's a continual thing, too. It's not like you do it once and you walk away. It's continual to keep your communities reinvigorated. It's not something that you stop once it's done, and both in terms of the built environment and in terms of the social network within a community. So that's why the capacity is so important, helping the communities to begin to do this on their own. It's very important.
We even knew back then, I mean, there were already examples back then, right in this area, to give credit where credit is due, the Stockade District in Schenectady
Yes.
was one of the first little concentrations of housing in a city in the United States
And
to
the
do
first historic district in the
to do
country.
the this hold house routine, which was a novelty in the
Yeah.
70s, and was looked upon by people who studied this nationally as one of the pioneering models of where this could go, that you could get people to invest in their neighborhood and restore historic property if they thought it had character and was worth saving and worth putting a little sweat equity into, et cetera. So even back in the 70s when this all got started, there were a few hints that this wasn't just a wacky idea of a bunch of ideologues. It was something that people didn't realize the potential of, and now it's happening everywhere. It's happening in the Lodo district of Denver. It's happened in Pittsburgh on the Strip. It's happened in Atlanta. It's happened in Knoxville, Tennessee. In spades, it's happened in Knoxville, Tennessee.
And it's happening in the Northeast in spite of the
Providence, Rhode
population
Island.
decline that you hear about.
Yeah.
New York and the Northeast are losing so much population. Well, yes, that may be the case, but that doesn't mean the communities have gotten worse. Matter of fact, communities in many cases are turning around.
Yeah.
Some more quickly than others, and some to more different degrees. But places in the Capital District have really turned that corner.
Success breeds success.
Very
When you
much.
when you now you have Riverspark, and now you have 3 centers. But it continues to grow. I mean, you get an area, you discover something, or an idea is developed.
Sure. I mean, look at the Cohoes Visitor Center. It's in the Cohoes Music Hall, which was, abandoned and falling apart when it was rescued and put back together again. And now CR Productions is there. They're doing a booming business. They're a very popular theater production unit and doing great repertory theater there. That kind of thing is popping up pretty spontaneously all over now. You've got an arts community in Troy. You've got downtown Remsen Street and Cohoes starting to perk up.
Is it?
Certainly the waterfront in Waterford, where their visitor center is one of the most popular stops
Phenomenal.
for pleasure boaters along the canal in the summertime, and they have these incredible festivals now, the Canal Fest and the Steamboat Meet, the Tugboat Roundup, which are now becoming sort of nationally
Very much
known.
well known.
I'm glad you brought that up, because here I'm thinking of how do people get to these places. I'm thinking, well, you got the river here, and people come by boat. And,
Right.
and
Very much, more and more so, but majority of tourists still come by car, but the recreational boating component of the canal system is increasing year by year, slowly but surely it's increasing. Places like Waterford are the gateway to both the Champlain Canal and the Erie Canal, and that little community is very different than it was 20 years ago. It's really come a long way.
is the lock system a part of this, or some areas are not so?
The canal system is owned by the state of New York and operated by the state of New York, but the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor is a nationally designated heritage corridor, and that includes all of the current navigable canal as well as some of the older remnants of it, such as the piece that's under the Maplewood School as part of the old Erie and Champlain junction there. So it is, portions of it are also state heritage areas that were designated some 20 years
Right.
ago. The Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor was designated in the year 2000. So we work in layers. There's layers of history, there's layers of designation that are around now to help tell these stories and tell these communities and help them out. So
Anything
That's very
happening in Utica? I see a skip from Albany. We have
Utica is part of the Mohawk Valley Heritage Corridor, and it's part of one of the counties. So yes, parts of the Mohawk Valley are still very much suffering from the deindustrialization
Yeah.
of the last century, and so, but they're turning the corner too. You can start to see. The Mohawk Valley is one of the most beautiful and still pristine landscapes in the nation, and the canal goes right through there. The noses in Canajoharie is just one of the most phenomenal pieces of geography you'll find anywhere in the country. So next time you drive out along the thruway,
Yes.
you go to Canajoharie, look up, and think back to what that history means and how the Native Americans thought it was a sacred place. So it's very interesting, layers of history.
Now, recently you had a development forum, New York State Heritage Development Forum. It was held here
In Troy.
In Troy. What was your objective? What were you?
Well, what we were trying to do there is, in addition to celebrating the joint anniversaries of the Heritage Program, we were reaching out to all these other partners around the state who also are working in this same line of work. Other state agencies, other nonprofit organizations, large regional organizations like the Seaway Trail and other scenic byways, to bring them all together in one place at one time and talk about what we do and find the commonalities. And we had 160, 70 people there in Troy last week to talk about what we do, how we can work together more closely, how common threads run through our lines of work, because as we say, there are state heritage areas, there are national heritage areas, there are scenic byways. Some people get confused by all of these things.
Yeah, well, it's confusing.
And so we wanted to say, let's get together at least the practitioners, the people who work on these programs, be sure we all understand what it is we do, which I think we do, and then that helps us to all go out and explain it to others, and to be able to deliver our services from the programs, be it any level of government or nonprofit, so that we are the program deliverers can do it in a much more efficient way. And so we're still working on some of the outcomes from that forum, but one of the things we did do for the event was we developed a resource guide, Heritage Development Resource Guide, which is a few definitions on what is heritage development and what does this all mean. It's mostly a brief and certainly not all-inclusive, but very, very comprehensive guide of other agencies and programs that work in this realm and throughout the state of New York, and a few of the national organizations as well. It's really something that we'll be posting on our website for New York State Parks.
I was going to ask you if that would be okay.
Because the hard copy is rather thick, but if people want a copy of it, they could get in touch with me, and we'll have it posted shortly, I think, on our website.
Let's do some of that contact stuff too, and hold your thought. And how does one get in touch? There's a website for the New York State Parks, right?
Right. NewYorkStateParks.org gets you into the State Parks website. Then you click on Heritage and click on Heritage
so you can
areas.
travel from that one and go.
Yes, and from that website you can get to all the heritage area websites, but many of them all have their own individual sites and their own domains as well.
Right.
Well, Riverspark is www.riverspark.org.
Okay. Now you were just about to say something and I clipped you off. What?
I wanted to say two things about this Heritage Development Forum last week. One is, since Marcia won't say it herself, is that Marcia and her fellow coordinator Lucy Breyer deserve a lot of credit for putting this together. It's really a milestone conference. I think it's the first time all of these practitioners from all these different agencies and all these different realms in the state of New York got together and talked to each other in a constructive way like this. I thought it was a big step forward in trying to get people working together instead of being off on their own doing various and sundry things. The second thing to say is how important that word development is in that phrase, Heritage Development Forum. Traditionally, people thought that heritage areas and heritage programs and so on were the province of nostalgic antiquarians who liked old buildings and sat around and told stories about their great-grandparents and so on and so forth. All very nice, but what's that got to do with anything that really matters, like money and making jobs and so on and so forth? Yeah. It's increasingly the case. It's very clear now that that done right, heritage programs can be an important component of sensible economic development. What better recycling can you have than to recycle a downtown and to avoid sprawl and gobbling up open areas that you don't need to gobble up and can keep natural and beautiful by having people live in cities instead, et cetera. And don't use the gasoline to go up and down the Northway between work and home. Walk to work, live near where you work, and so on and so forth. So there's the smart growth, recycling, environmental component to it. There's also the argument that's often made that heritage tourists are the most profitable tourists to have. They tend to be more affluent. They tend to stay longer. They tend to drop more money in the place they go to. Et cetera, that can be a very significant engine. In fact, heritage tourism is one of the top money-producing, revenue-producing industries in the state of New York. Most people don't know that.
No.
Not as big as agriculture, but it's up there. This conference focused specifically on that. For example, one of the presentations that was given was one that I gave. It's sort of an after-the-fact Monday morning quarterbacking about what did and didn't work in the Riverspark Heritage Area. Having done this for 30 years, we've learned which things get traction in sequence when. And we've presented that a little over a year ago. I went out to Buffalo to give a similar version of that talk to the Niagara River Greenway Commission, which is just starting up a similar attempt to revitalize the industrial area between Niagara Falls and Buffalo on the Niagara River. And I told them, well, this is what's worked and this is how it's worked in this sequence in Riverspark. And we didn't really understand that 30 years ago,
Sure.
but we know now.
Right.
And now that we know that, we can use that experience to accelerate the application of that same strategy elsewhere. This conference was very important for getting that word out, for people to check against each other about what does and doesn't succeed.
And we'll be doing a publication from the event to do some of the conference proceedings and to lay out some of those best practices and models so that people will be able to, look at something and say, well, maybe this will work in my place and in my community.
Did you carry this on nationally too? Is there a national forum for you to go to, or something established where you can?
There is a national organization known as the Alliance of National Heritage Areas, which is really the leader in this heritage concept at the national level. They work with all of the national heritage areas, the state program that we have as a member of that as well. So they are another resource that we can go to. And other organizations like the National Trust for Historic Preservation, one of their staff was at our conference last week. They too have worked for many years, and particularly heritage tourism and in rural heritage tourism as well. So there are other resources out there. They're mentioned in this guide. But we are trying to pull a lot of them together within the state to try and get us a bit more coordinated, working more in terms of the smart growth that we've been doing in these programs and in these communities for many years. And now smart growth, of course, is a very important movement at the national level as well.
We're very fortunate here to have something that's extremely rare, that our area right here is in two national heritage areas. It's in the Erie-Canalway National Heritage Corridor, which Marcia's already mentioned. It's also in the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area, which runs up and down the Hudson River. So we've got two national heritage areas pulling for us, which helps a lot.
And there is also a third, and may I just mention, got to get into the third national heritage area just designated last year is the Champlain Valley Partnership, which basically goes from Saratoga County north up to the Canadian border, includes part of Vermont. So there are three national heritage areas in New York State at this point in time.
Right. That doesn't quite come down to right where the studio is, but it's very
but
close.
Almost, just up the road a piece.
Close.
Just,
Right. So the three of them intersect right here where the Hudson and the Mohawk intersect, and the Erie Canal. And that really helps us to be on the national map more than we'd be without that assistance. And the staffs on both of those, three of those, I haven't worked much with the third one, but the first two organizations have been very, very supportive of us and very much eager to work with us as partners. It's been great.
So we also now have the federal level of government as partners. So
Wonderful.
We have all layers of government, lots of nonprofit and private sector involvement as well. So it's really about partnerships. It really comes back down to this is a partnership program. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of persistence to carry it out, but over time, it's a proven model of success.
Right.
Someone wants to visit the visitor center. Where is it located, and what are your hours of operation?
The Troy Visitor Center is located at 251 River Street in downtown Troy, right next to City Hall at the intersection of Broadway and 2nd and River Streets, right at Monument Square, in the middle of downtown. Normal hours are Tuesdays through Saturdays, 11 to 5. In the summer, it's 10 to 5. But we do open occasionally nights and weekends, and we're open special times for the turkey trot on Thanksgiving and Victorian Stroll on December 2nd, and Troy Night Out, which is every Friday night from the last Friday of every month from 5 to 9 p.m., etc. The Cohoes Visitor Center is open Tuesdays through Fridays from 12 to 4 and is also open on Saturdays reasonably regularly, although not absolutely every Saturday, and is not only run by the City of Troy in part, but also by the Spindle City Historic Society, which is a big help for making that visitor center go. The Waterford Visitor Center, Waterford Harbor Visitor Center, is more seasonal. It's primarily open in the summertime when they pretty much have to be servicing the pleasure boats round the clock.
All the time.
They have a very large contingent of volunteers from the Waterford community who do everything they can to make the boaters there happy in the summertime. In the wintertime, it's pretty much shut down for the colder winter months. There's not a whole lot of boaters who come through Waterford at mid-January.
I would also like to mention, too, there's a visitor center at Peoples Island State Park, which is a visitor center for both the Peoples Island State Park and for the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor.
Okay.
And that's located right at Peoples Island State Park. You can approach it from either Cohoes or from Waterford over one-lane railroad bridges, which are very safe to go over. And that's open every day in the summer. At this point in time, it's open by appointment only in the winter months. So that you can call our office and we can set up appointments if someone's interested.
Okay, you mentioned phones, so I need to have your phone number.
All right, our office phone is 237-8643, and that gets you into Peoples Island Resource Center.
Okay.
My number?
Yep.
518-274-5267. The Troy Visitor Center is 518-270-8667, and I'd have to look to tell you the Cohoes and Waterford numbers. I don't. Maybe you can look it up for me.
We
How
can.
How much time do you have?
We'll find them and we'll put them up. We'll put them up for
right
us.
here.
So.
They're in this profile.
Since I don't
We'll
have
find them for you.
Since I don't have to make payroll for the staffs of those two, I don't know the number as well.
Now, is there an admission at all? This is free.
All
No,
free.
they're all
Okay,
free.
free, and a wonderful opportunity for people.
That doesn't mean we wouldn't like donations.
Donations. Okay.
We operate on the most incredible of shoestrings all the time. We are constantly under capacity for the demand, constantly. We'd love to have more sponsorship and help, but we don't charge the general public for what we do, no.
Wonderful.
We do occasionally charge for the odd item. We certainly charge for mugs and sweatshirts and T-shirts
Sure.
and
Oh,
baseball hats.
sure.
It's a gift shop
Of
items.
course.
We've got a little self-guided walking tour brochure downtown Troy. We charge a whole quarter for that so that we can keep it in print. That's a revolving fund that lets us reprint it when it runs out. But mostly everything is done for free. And the public expects tourism services to be free. When we've tried charging for things, people become indignant.
Yep.
So we don't charge.
Wonderful.
Much as we'd love to have more revenue than we've got.
Sorry to say, we're getting close to running out of time. So I just want to give you one last opportunity, as it were, to say whatever you feel like saying, promote this heritage areas, whatever. I'll start with you, Marcia.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for inviting us to be here today. We appreciate the concept of heritage areas. Is not one that's easily known and recognized throughout the country, but I think it's one that's growing. And we're here primarily to provide services to community residents and to visitors. So it's not necessary that everybody know that Troy is a heritage area. We love them to know that, but more importantly, we want them to be a user-friendly place where people can go and get to service and have a good feeling about their visitor experience. So we're really here in terms of providing services to the public.
Tom.
I don't want your viewers to think that we've covered all the bases yet. They're just going to have to come to learn more.
That's right.
Good for you.
Just to give you two examples, the theme for Riverspark is labor and industry, and I've said nothing yet about labor, even though this area is nationally significant for its labor history. The Collar City laundry workers were organized at the end of the Civil War by Kate Mullaney, a 19-year-old Irish immigrant woman who was the organizer of the first truly all-female labor union in the United States. And first woman to serve national office in organized labor in the United States. The iron molders local in South Troy at the time the Civil War broke out was the largest labor union local in the United States, and extremely powerful, and it goes on from there. To give you another example, we're very important in Irish history. James, to segue from labor history into Irish history, James Connolly, born in Edinburgh to Irish immigrant parents, came to Troy and lived in Troy for 3 years. In the early 1900s, he was a labor organizer and an Irish Republican patriot. There's a bust of him in downtown Troy right behind the statue of Uncle Sam, which I also haven't mentioned all this time. Yes. He, after being here, went down south of here for a while, and then he went back to Ireland to organize the Irish Republicans and was one of the organizers of the famous Easter Rising in Dublin in 1916, for which he was executed by the British. He's a national hero in Ireland. There are streets named after him. He's been on the Irish currency. We have a steady stream of Irish citizens who come to Troy just to see the bust of James Connolly and to see the house where he lived while he was here. He sold insurance from a building that used to be where Troy City Hall is today. Those are only 2 examples of another dozen or so themes that we could pursue. So people just have to come to the Riverspark Heritage Area, to all of our sites, to find out all the stuff they missed by just watching this program.
I love it. There's your hook. There's your hook.
Tip
You
of
know,
the
and I
iceberg.
invite all of our viewers to partake and to explore more. So once again, thank you very much for being on the show today. I really enjoyed talking
Thank
with
you.
you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining me on Getting to Know You. I hope you enjoyed today's program and will join me next time. Until then, have a good one.